The other diet that I'm very worried about as a psychiatrist that's on the rise around the world is the plant-based diet. So the plant-based diets are vegan and vegetarian diets. These are really, there's a movement afoot. This is a really, Germany takes the lead. 44% of Germans now describe themselves as eating a low-meat diet. That's up from 26% just 3 years ago. And in the United States, there's been a 50% increase in vegetarians and vegans in the United States in the past 10 years alone. And veganism in particular has increased to 6% of Americans. That's up 500% in the past 3 years. So what's interesting if you look around the world is that there are actually 1.5 billion vegetarians estimated to live on the planet, but the vast majority of them are not vegetarian by choice. They're vegetarian because they can't access nutritious animal foods. About 5% are by choice. I call them voluntary vegetarianism, tends to trend with affluence and education. So how can I stand here and tell you that I'm worried about this plant-based diet being unhealthy for the brain when we have actual real-life clinical trials showing us that plant-based diets can be helpful, truly helpful, in metabolic disorders such as obesity, diabetes, and heart disease? I can tell you that confidently because they did not simply remove animal foods from these diets. No. What they did was they removed almost all of the fat. They manipulated multiple other lifestyle variables, often stress, smoking, etc. And lo and behold, they removed the refined carbohydrates. So how in the world are we supposed to know what is responsible for the benefits of these diets? It may have had nothing to do with plantfulness or animalistness. And given what we understand about how refined carbohydrates affect metabolism, my money is on the sugarlessness. We don't yet have, to the best of my knowledge, any randomized controlled trials comparing a whole foods plant-based diet to a whole foods animal-based diet. That would be a fair fight, and I'd be very interested to see what that would show. So simply removing animal foods from the diet is an untested intervention. But what about mental health? Do we have any studies of mental health and plant-based diets? Well, we have a few epidemiological studies. They're weak, they're mixed, they're poorly conducted. They often don't control for refined carbohydrates. That's just a problem that keeps happening. And there aren't any meaningful clinical trials. So we don't really have a lot to go on in that regard. But I would argue that we don't need more studies because we already know so much about what the brain needs. We know what it's made of. We know how it operates. We've been studying it for a long time. We don't know everything about it, of course, but we know what it's made of. So one of the mistakes that keeps happening in nutritional research is that researchers will choose their pet diet and then test it out on people with various conditions and see what happens. And they're always comparing whatever their pet diet is to the sad Western diet. And of course, it's always going to do better. And then they can say that their diet is great. I don't think we need any more studies in order to make scientifically sound recommendations about brain food. So when you study it that way, when you pick your diet and apply it, you're studying nutrition from the outside in. I prefer to study it from the inside out. What does the brain need? How do we get it there? So, when I was in psychiatry residency, 4 years of psychiatry residency after medical school, not a word about diet in 4 years, of course, I left with the impression that the brain was just a bag of neurotransmitters designed to be manipulated with medications. And, and I did that for a while until I became interested in nutrition. But of course, the brain is so much more than that. It's this beautiful, sophisticated electrical organ lined with these special fats, and it's just amazing. And billions and billions of beautiful cells, and if everything isn't constructed properly, it's not going to work. It doesn't matter how many drugs you throw at it or how well your neurotransmitters are working. So, what is the brain made of? Let's start there. So, the brain is 2/3 fat. And a full 20% of that is this amazing essential omega-3 fatty acid called DHA. The brain has a lot of protein in it. Of course, every organ needs protein to build essential components, neurotransmitters and the like. The brain is loaded with cholesterol. 20% of your body's cholesterol is housed in the brain, and that despite the fact that the brain only represents 2% of your body weight. And the brain, again, an energy hog, needs a constant supply of glucose and ketones to keep it running. And in order to extract energy from those molecules, it needs lots of vitamins and minerals to run those chemical reactions. I'd like to introduce you a little bit more to DHA. So DHA is a really incredible molecule. It's been conserved over evolution for more than 500 million years in vertebrates. So vertebrates have used it as is for that length of time, and you'll find it enriched in all of these special places in the body, from mitochondrial membranes to synapses and even to the photoreceptor in the retina. It's responsible for helping to maintain the integrity of the blood-brain barrier as well. So interestingly, DHA is really critical for the proper development of the frontal cortex in humans, and if that doesn't go well, problems can ensue. So what is so special about this molecule? Well, it turns out that the configuration of it has quantum mechanical properties, and that just means that and I'm not a physicist, but my understanding is that it interacts with electrons in a very special way, in a couple of important ways. One is, as in the retina, in the photoreceptor, it can actually transform sunlight into electricity. And in synapses and other places in the body, it actually functions as a semiconductor, buffering electron flow. It's really quite amazing. So people much smarter than I am have hypothesized that without DHA, consciousness, symbolic thinking, intelligence, impossible. And according to this researcher, DHA plays a unique and indispensable role in the neural signaling essential for higher intelligence. So here's the rub. Plant foods contain absolutely no DHA whatsoever. They contain ALA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, but it is widely agreed that it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to transform ALA from plant foods in the body into the DHA that the brain needs. This may help to explain why vegetarians and vegans have lower DHA levels than omnivores. Another powerful argument for including animal foods in the diet if you care about your brain is the micronutrient access argument. So here are some nutrients of interest. Actually, every single nutrient that the body needs can be found in animal foods, and what's more, in the most highly bioavailable form possible. Compare that to plant foods, which not only are lacking certain key nutrients, such as B12, vitamin K2, EPA, and DHA, but some of the forms of nutrients that they contain are harder for us to use, iron, for example. So to make matters even worse, plants also contain something animal foods do not contain, anti-nutrients. So anti-nutrients are chemicals, natural chemicals in plants that are there for their own purposes. But many of them interfere with our ability to utilize nutrients not only from the plant foods that we eat, but from the animal foods that we eat along with those plant foods. And I want to call your attention to a couple of them. Soy, which is an important staple protein food for people who choose a plant-based diet, interferes with iodine utilization, and that can impact thyroid function. And thyroid function is very important for the brain.
Tofu, which is actually a great substitute for meat. I have a great recipe in the book on how to make tofu. It's got all the protein of meat with none of the bad stuff, how to make it taste like meat.
And then the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, which are really important, crucial elements of a plant-based diet because they do contain protein. They are rich in phytic acid, and phytic acid is a mineral magnet that interferes with minerals like iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium.
I would say this is arguably here the greatest longevity diet ever invented. It was invented in Latin America, Mesoamerica. They call it the Three Sisters. Corn, which they use to make these beautiful whole grain corn tortillas, beans, and squash. And when you mix these three together, not only complex carbohydrate, but as much protein as a 3-ounce steak, and fiber dense. In the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, where we found the longest lived people in the Americas, they're eating mostly bean tortillas with squash. Of course, it's beautifully prepared, and it's about 80% of their dietary intake. Very important. And then here in America, the longest lived Americans are actually among the Seventh-day Adventists. And if you're eating a handful of nuts a day, about 2 ounces, you're probably living about 2 years longer than your friend who's not eating a handful.
Amazing. So why is this important? It's important because, again, remember, the brain needs more nutrients than many other parts of the body because of its activity. And these nutrients are really key to brain function. If you are deficient in these, your brain may not be working at top speed. So how bad is this phytic acid problem? Here's an example. If you eat zinc-rich oysters with black beans, you will absorb less than half of the zinc from those oysters. If you eat those same oysters with corn tortillas, you absorb virtually none of the zinc from the oysters. So it's literally robbing your brain of these minerals. And this may help to explain why vegans are more likely to be inadequate in zinc than omnivores. Note that omnivores are also at risk because they do eat some of these seed foods. Iron deficiency is rampant. People think of iron deficiency, in women in particular, people think of iron deficiency as a blood problem. But iron deficiency, if you have iron deficiency, you also have a brain problem. So it's another reason why I think that meat belongs in a healthy brain healthy diet. But it doesn't have to be red meat. By meat, I mean animal foods. It can be the meat of any animal. So, for example, duck is richer in iron than red meat, and oysters even more so. And when it comes to iron and B12, oysters are a powerhouse. And if you're looking for, liver is as well, it's less palatable to many people. But if you're looking for DHA, really seafood is where it's at. And if you look at this chart, salmon is included there, and it just kind of blows everybody else out of the water. So the people that I'm most concerned about when it comes to low meat or plant-based diet in terms of accessing critical brain nutrients are women. So because women are more likely to be culturally averse to eating meat and fat. That may help to explain why 3/4 of vegans are female in the United States. They're more likely to prioritize weight and appearance over health. They're more likely to prioritize animal and planet health over their own personal health for compassionate reasons. And this is not just a problem for the women that we care about in our lives, it is also a problem for the future generations because women literally feed the brains, build the brains of the next generation through their food choices. So what happens if you don't get enough DHA early in life? These are, again, just associations. We can't be sure. But children with autism are more likely to have lower levels of DHA, for example. And omega-3 supplementation doesn't seem to help very much. The critical window for obtaining DHA in young life is the 3rd trimester to age 2. Once that window closes, we may not be able to undo a lot of that damage. With ADHD, we know that children are more likely to be obese or overweight, twice as likely than their age-matched counterparts, but we don't know if there's a cause and effect relationship there. But we do know that they tend to be deficient in omega-3s, particularly DHA, EPA, and zinc and iron. Again, zinc and iron are much easier to get from animal foods than from plant foods. There's been some very interesting elimination diet studies with ADHD, putting children on what looks mostly like a whole foods diet. They threw in some margarine and some apple juice too, but just a few foods diet, and a little misguided. But these studies show remarkable results. They're flawed studies, but there are quite a few of them, and they all point in the same direction. And so why not try that?